Thanks, Deputy DC. Deputy Murphy.
Thank you, Chair.
Could I ask you to be conscious of the time because we're back in at 2.
I appreciate that, Chair. Probably maybe 20 to 25 minutes, if that's okay. Because it's a particular project that I'd like to look at, that the OPW has been involved with, a private entity, the redevelopment of the Irish Jewish Museum, which has received planning permission after on board Planola. And just to give you an angle of where I'm coming from, I'm not interested in the plans themselves. I didn't make any observations or submissions on them. I don't think that's the role of a TD, but I do believe that TD has a role in terms of oversight. I'm not interested in terms of the body that this has been done with, the Irish Jewish Museum. I think it's important that the state makes a contribution to its own history and heritage and culture. And we do that in many ways. But I'm interested in the particular way the OPW has conducted itself in terms of this project. So I want to ask questions to try and get a better insight into how the OPW works when it does these things and what's been the conclusion, I suppose, in this particular case. The OPW was first engaged in this project in 2007 was the instruction of the Taoiseach at the time?
Yes.
Okay. How does that work? Did he make a formal request in writing to the OPW?
Yes, there was a formal request to the Office of Public Works.
Okay. That came from the Taoiseach's office?
Via the offices of the Taoiseach, yeah.
That the OPW become involved in this
yes.
project? With
yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And the permission for that comes under legislation. I just want to be clear on this. There's two pieces of legislation that you've cited yourself in documentation. The Commission of Public Works Act 1996 and the State Authorities Act 1993. Yes. Now, what exactly does that provide for? That you act on, I mean, is it a broad provision that you would act at the discretion of the Taoiseach when he orders you to, or how does it?
Well, it allows that we can use the resources of the office on the direction, I mean, of government.
Okay.
And ministerial, that would come through our own minister either, our Taoiseachs. Yeah.
And this direction was given from government from the Taoiseach's office. Did you have to seek clarification that it was within the scope of the OPW's mandate, or is that something you knew at the time?
It would have been comprehended that we had the authority to do this, yes.
So at the time, was there a precedent for this type of work by the OPW?
Yes, we would have been involved in a number of projects in relation to, for example, the Irish College in Paris. There would have been the St. Isidore's in Rome, Leuven, where other entities had owned the properties, but we were requested to provide support to them. Now, government might subsequently have provided funding as well, but initially we would have been providing professional and technical services. For example, another one is the JFK Museum in very recent times in Wexford, privately owned. We designed and we provided the funding to the development.
It does?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. But the involvement in this particular instance, what did it consist of? Architectural assistance?
Yes, it was our resources were around the development and the design and the preparation of planning drawings, and including resources from our architectural services, our civil instruction engineering service and quantity surveying services. And I would say that as part of that, we did exchange, because we had a slight gap in relation to we needed to have information on the ground conditions, so we did avail of an external provider, and the totality around that in relation to specialist planning advice, because we were engaged to take it to planning, was about 13,000.
I'll just come back to that in a second, if I may. I just want to get a bit greater clarity on the period of time, because you were engaged with this from 2007 until 2013.
Yes.
Essentially until I think maybe probably October, November, when.
Well, to the planning, we assisted in relation to the design.
And was it a constant project over that time, or?
No.
Okay.
No.
Well, I mean, was there a gap at all in terms of, did you work from 2007 to 2008, and then did things halt for 2 years, or?
I won't have the actual timelines, but there would have been gaps, because we would have been, the client for the purposes of this was the Irish Jewish Museum, so we would have been working with them and developing designs, and so that and there would have been pauses in that, because I think unfortunately there were a number of bereavements within the family of the Irish Jewish Museum, of people who are principals around this project, and so that might have affected. So we would have been, there would have been gaps, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And in terms of how many people were involved on the OPW side, I mean, looking at the planning applications that have gone in, I mean, I think I've counted 5 architects on the design team and a principal architect, and 3 other people who were involved in the report that was done in relation to the water and the...
These are supervisory. When you do these, they're all recognised as roles, but they're actually a line management rather than the direct involvement of somebody on the work. So it's a supervisory element.
Right, but when plans are submitted, say, for example, because I don't look at these much, but I was just interested in them. At the bottom of each page on the plans, you'll have, there's a principal architect, which is the state architect in this instance, then a list of the design team. Now, are they the design team, or are they just people who signed off on plans? Yeah, but
the amount of effort from any one of them, I think we did look at this from the point of view of it. I don't know whether a question from you, Deputy, that overall there would have been one person for 58 weeks, but in fact that broke down then between different people, different times over the period of 07 to 13. If you were to say that was the totality, was one person over 58 weeks.
Okay, I want to come back to that. That was I know you did that work for Deputy Kevin Humphreys. You asked a number of questions on this previously. Just to jump briefly to the external services. There was ground investigations work at I think €8,066. And specialist planning advice. The estimate was €5,000, I think, as of October 2013. Is there a final figure for that yet?
I think that is the figure. I think we would have external providers on planning, and it was off of their contract we would have drawn this advice. So it would have been in the context of them saying to us the planning advice
the work for you, and they said, well, it's okay. And in terms of engaging external services, like you did in this instance. Again, was that the first time you've done this, or is that a practice in the OPW?
Oh yeah, no, that would be a practice because we don't have the resources in-house to do everything. So using external providers to do work, we do it.
JFK.
The JFK, yes, in part, I think, on some of it. On flood relief, on doing the surveys, on construction, yes, on all our fronts. But we need specialists in-house though to supervise all of that as well.
But just, I mean, because I'm just trying to understand that this is a regular practice at the OPW, that you would engage such external client services for projects where you're entering into doing design, say, for a private entity. That would be, okay. And then, so the final bill on the external services, you gave me a figure just previously was...
as in, it's 13,000.
13,000,
yeah.
Now, I just want to come to the question Deputy Kevin Humphreys submitted, in which we got this answer of one person for 58 weeks, because I was trying to assess the monetary value above the external services in terms of the OPW's engagement in this. In that reply to that parliamentary question, I've got a copy of it here actually. In the reply, you talk about procedures being in place to monitor and manage the resource input by professional services in the OPW. This includes the recording of the grade and contributed hours of all professional staff employed on the project. And these records inform OPW management on the efficient use of and deployment, of its resources. So what that tells me is that when the OPW, when your design team, when your architects are working, they're clocking their hours effectively. So you can see how they're spending their time, like one might do in an accountancy firm or in a legal firm. And that's the practice in the OPW.
Well, that is certainly within our architectural practice, and particularly it arises because where people are working on new projects, and we want to ensure where we get external demands that have we capacity to release onto other projects. So and particularly in particular teams where we have heavier demands, we would have architects, I just need to say, not employed in design work. We have architects who are responsible for overseeing our maintenance on our buildings, so they're not in the design. So we wouldn't necessarily be the same clocking in terms of design.
That could be on site somewhere. Okay.
So
but that doesn't apply to this case here.
No, it doesn't apply. No, I just rather than I didn't want to be saying that I'm doing this.
No, absolutely. I appreciate the clarification of the detail.
Yeah.
It then goes on in the reply to say where requirements arise to support initiatives or provide services outside of the strict parameters of a project timeline, as occurred in this instance, the recording of the full extent of such resource inputs is not assiduously observed. I just want to break down the sentence a bit to understand it properly. Where requirements arise, so in this instance it was the requirement from the Taoiseach's office to become involved, to support initiatives or provide services outside of the strict parameters of a project timeline. What does that mean?
I think, sorry, and maybe need to
You
look
don't have
back.
in front of you, do you?
I think what may happen on certain things where somebody is doing the design, I know this happens, and they have a particular instance of some concern in relation to something, they will consult with their colleagues in relation to that. Their colleagues will provide them with information. That information might not be, recorded by their colleague that they were on that. But it's one or whoever, whatever number of people, their core responsibility in relation to producing all the work. But because we're an expert kind of knowledge organisation, there's a sharing of knowledge between colleagues. I think that I would prefer if I kind of maybe looked at it.
The strict parameters of the project timeline, and this is happening outside of that. What do you mean when you say strict parameters of a
Sorry,
timeline?
but the Jewish Museum may have been in a different category, but certainly in relation to all our construction projects, we would have timelines in relation to that, because what we have to bring to planning, what we have now, and we manage risk around that, and so we would be ensuring that the resources that are being allocated that are actually operating and working on that. So that would be where it'd be. This was a somewhat different project because it was to somebody else's timelines.
Yes. Okay.
If you know what I mean.
Okay.
We weren't. This one was being driven by the
Timeline.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then it goes on to say that, as occurred in this instance, the recording of the full extent of
Yeah.
such resource inputs is not assiduously observed. First of all, so why weren't they observed? I mean, if you're doing a project, say it's on someone's timelines,
Yeah.
it's still an architect sitting at a desk who can say, right, for the next hour, I'm going to work on this particular design.
The persons who were working on this and who had responsibility for the overall design, the person who can say, I designed that building, their time would be fully accounted on that project.
Fully accounted.
Fully accounted for on that
Okay.
project in terms of the time. But all of their time may not have been, but the
All
time
of
they
their time.
spent on it would have been.
So when you
Yeah.
say that the full extent of such resource inputs, you're talking about people other than the
Yeah.
architect's desk.
Yes.
When he goes and talks to a colleague and
Yes.
say, look, there's a thing with a roof here and I'm not quite sure about how getting the pitch, or when he has a
But-
chat. Yeah.
Yeah, it is in relation to that. If there is detailing or something that somebody else has that expertise in relation to something of air handling, air conditioning, you would go and you would use their data, that you would talk to your colleagues around that. They might have input, they might come and look at your scheme, you might give them the scheme that they'll come back to when their efforts might not be recording that.
The person who's coming over to the desk to help, that might not be getting clocked in as time on the project. Okay, so that's what you mean when you say it's not being assiduously observed.
Yeah.
Because it's not a strict, yes, I spent 15 minutes thinking about this.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. But then, and you touched on it already, nevertheless, an estimate of the technical contributions recorded from 2010 to 2013 on this project in regard to architectural engineering and quantity surveying services equates to one person for 58 weeks. Why 2010 to 2013? Why not from 2007? When you first became engaged by the detox department?
Yeah, I think I would have to look, Deputy, forgive me, with where the scheme got developed, because I think there might have been the concentration of the effort in the later time than earlier times. I think while engaged in 07, this project did not move for a considerable period of time, and I think it may have been within our own organisation and elsewhere there was particular circumstances, but not to do with the project, just the project didn't get the effort
bit of a pause,
until later on.
and concentration of work.
Yeah.
But when you say an estimate of the technical contributions, so how is that estimate achieved?
I think it was by looking back through records, and it was also on what was involved and understood to be by line managers within those areas.
Okay, so you go back and see that, person A spent 10 hours.
I won't necessarily say exactly, but I need to talk back into my colleagues. But yes, I would imagine there would be something on those lines.
What I'd like, if it's possible, is a detailed note on actually how that figure was arrived at. One person for 58 weeks.
Yes.
And why 2010 to 2013.
Okay.
I think that information is important to be certain that the OPW is recording the work that it's doing for anybody, not just in this instance, but at any time. And when you say one person for 58 weeks, I mean, what's the monetary? What's that in monetary terms? I mean, what person at what grade?
I think at architecture grade, I'm not sure. We can give you the pay scales that is for that.
I'd like to pay, if you could on the note, if you don't mind, the pay scales as well.
Yeah.
And when you say one person for 58 weeks, I mean, are you talking about 7-day weeks, 5-day weeks? I mean, is this?
I imagine it's working weeks. It's
working weeks.
Yeah.
And a normal working day.
Sorry, of a working day. Yeah.
Normal working day, normal working week.
Yeah.
58 weeks.
Yeah.
Okay. And yeah, so if I just to conclude on that section of it, in terms of getting to the monetary value of the assistance given by the OPW, if I get a bit of a detailed note, because we have received correspondence in the PAC about this, and people do have questions about how the OPW is conducting its work in these instances. I think more details is better.
The OPW conducts its work assiduously and.
Absolutely, and I think that's clear from the conversation that we're having.
Yes.
No, I'm not calling that into question.
Okay.
I think, though, in the answer that Deputy Humphreys received, there wasn't perhaps the kind of detail that people might have liked to have seen, because it wasn't clear from that answer when I read it, and I know when others read it, that time was being clocked on this, or that there was a way of saying that there was an architect at a desk doing work for a period of time. And I want clarity on that. But I'm not making any suggestion about the OPW conducting this work at all.
Different area, this Deputy Murphy.
I'm moving to conclude, Chair.
Okay. Oh, sorry.
Moving to conclude.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks.
Probably half one.
Yeah. So just as to the current state of play with this project, so I can be clear where we are. The oral hearing is concluded in November 2013. So is that the OPW's? Does that cease to be involved in this project, or is there more work to come?
That would be a request from elsewhere if that is to be the case. But from our point of view, our resources have been employed to bring it to the design and preparation of the planning, and including taking it to planning. And now the planning permission has been received. From my point of view, our agreement, our involvement, that would now be at that end. As to whether we go
Would require a direction from government?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And are there any further bills expected from the external service providers on this project?
No.
No. Okay. And you won't. Sorry, we've already cleared that in terms of construction phase. And sorry. To your knowledge, actually, I mean, when you get involved with this and you go to external services for outside expertise, say, I mean, are other departments involved at all? Or say in this project, was there any other state entity involved? It's just the OPW coming in to do the planning and design?
I'm not aware. There may have been others, but no, we were involved. It was.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And you won't have a role during construction phase?
Well, sorry, I'm saying our role now is complete on the basis of completing this phase.
Right.
Whether we get.
Will depend on the direction from government.
Sorry?
That will depend on that direction from government if you are to.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.